In the grand and often brutal drama unfolding at the heart of the Roman Empire, Claudius's name was hardly whispered among contenders for supreme power. Among the brilliant, ambitious, or even simply prominent figures of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, he seemed the least suited to wear the imperial purple. Fate, however, often playing cruel tricks on ruling families, intervened dramatically. A series of tragic events and an astonishingly high mortality rate among the male members of this powerful dynasty inexorably narrowed the circle of potential heirs. Thus, at a moment of extreme tension and disarray, it was he, the long-neglected one, who was suddenly proclaimed emperor by the powerful Praetorian Guard, a force capable of making and breaking rulers. His lineage was undeniably royal, though it hardly foreshadowed a direct path to the throne. Born in 10 BCE in distant Lugdunum, now known as Gaul, he was the son of Drusus, the valiant brother of Emperor Tiberius himself. His mother, Antonia, carried the blood of two of the era's greatest figures. She was the daughter of the legendary Mark Antony and Octavia, sister of the deified Augustus. Such a distinguished lineage, it seemed, should have opened all doors for him, but reality proved far more complex and disheartening. It was therefore unsurprising that after Tiberius's death, when the question of succession became most pressing, his candidacy was decisively rejected. Society, and influential circles in particular, considered him too unsound, incapable of bearing the burden of power, and thus utterly unfit to govern a great empire. Indeed, his mannerisms and physical characteristics seemed only to confirm these judgments. It is said his speech was hesitant, accompanied by a stutter, and his gait betrayed some physical deformity in his leg. These traits, so uncharacteristic of the ideal Roman leader, made him an object of ridicule and scorn, creating an image of a man utterly unfitting for the grandeur of imperial dignity. Yet, as the chronicler Suetonius attests, the moment he sat, a completely different image appeared, a tall, stately man with an imposing posture, radiating a hidden dignity. This dissonance between his appearance in motion and at rest only underscored the enigmatic nature of his personality, prompting one to wonder what truly lay behind his apparent flaws. For most of his life, Claudius remained in the shadows, entirely removed from active public life by both the first emperor, Augustus, and his successor, Tiberius. He was deliberately kept away from state affairs, as it was believed his presence might harm the prestige of the ruling family or, at the very least, offer no benefit. Only in 37 CE, for a brief period, did he manage to hold the prestigious office of consul, sharing it with his nephew, the then Emperor Caligula. However, this was no triumph for him. Instead, it became a new series of humiliations. Caligula, known for his unpredictable and at times cruel nature, mercilessly tormented his uncle, making him a laughingstock before esteemed senators and subjecting him to tasteless, insulting pranks. It was a time of deep personal pain and public disgrace. Thus, by the time an incredible twist of fate elevated him to supreme power, Claudius had virtually no real experience in state administration or participation in the complex political life of the empire. His path to the throne lacked the usual stages of preparation, making his ascent even more astonishing and unpredictable. Instead of weaving intrigues or engaging in military campaigns, he immersed himself in the world of books and scholarly pursuits. His passion was writing historical works, in which he found solace and meaning. He was a profound admirer of Roman antiquity and, particularly, of the first emperor Augustus, whose deeds he studied with diligence and reverence. Perhaps it was in these solitary pursuits, far from the bustle of the court, that the unique mindset was formed that would later allow him to achieve something truly outstanding, against all expectations. The overthrow of Caligula, the Roman emperor, was orchestrated by the Praetorian Guard, with several senators participating in the conspiracy. There is no direct evidence of Claudius's involvement in the assassination. However, it is widely presumed that he was at least aware of the impending plot, as he left the scene shortly before his nephew was killed. Caligula also had personal bodyguards consisting of Germanic barbarians, and upon realizing their emperor had fallen to conspirators, they immediately dispatched several individuals involved in the act. Consequently, Claudius was forced to take refuge behind one of the palace curtains. He was discovered by the Praetorian Guard, who promptly proclaimed him princeps, or emperor. He was swiftly taken to the Praetorian Guards camp just outside Rome, where Claudius secured their loyalty by effectively bribing them. Each Praetorian received 15,000 sesterces. This event set a significant precedent for subsequent emperors ascending the Roman throne. Following Caligula's assassination, the Senate convened, seriously discussing the possibility of reverting to a republican form of government without an emperor. However, this idea did not find widespread support among the Roman populace, who often viewed the emperor as a counterbalance to the Senate's power, which typically acted solely in its own interests. Since the Praetorian Guard had already chosen a successor, the Senate's options were severely limited. Claudius was officially proclaimed emperor on January 25, 41 CE, at the age of 50. Upon ascending the throne, Claudius made conscious efforts to establish cooperation with the Senate, aiming for conscientious and effective governance. He sought to restore the Senate's dignity, urging its members to vote honestly rather than merely following his directives. Claudius did not need flatterers; on the contrary, he actively encouraged open debate in the Senate. Caligula's exiled sisters were permitted to return to the city, and the treason trials, which Caligula had resumed, were once again abolished. Claudius also annulled some taxes introduced by his predecessors, and virtually all of Caligula's assassins received pardons. Previous emperors, such as Augustus and Tiberius, traditionally relied on their slaves and freedmen for state administration. A freedman, as is known, was a former slave who had gained freedom from his master in recognition of diligent and loyal service. However, it was Claudius who elevated this practice to an entirely new level, establishing a centralized bureaucratic system where key departments were headed exclusively by freedmen. This emerging imperial civil service operated entirely independently of the Senate, and notably, many of these influential freedmen did not originate from Rome or northern Italy, thus ensuring their unquestioning loyalty solely to the emperor. During this period, a poorly planned revolt erupted in Dalmatia, instigated by the local governor at the urging of some senators. Nevertheless, the rebellion quickly collapsed as soldiers refused to follow their governor, ultimately leading to the chief conspirator's suicide. Under Claudius's reign, the Roman Empire once again demonstrated significant territorial expansion. The provinces of Lycia in Anatolia, Noricum located north of the Alps, Thrace in the Balkans, as well as Judea and Mauritania, were annexed and brought under direct Roman rule, each occurring under various historical circumstances. However, Claudius's most notable legacy is undoubtedly the Roman invasion of Britain, led by Aulus Plautius. The campaign to this island began in 43 CE. To execute this massive operation, 4 legions were mobilized and dispatched. The 2nd Augusta, the 14th Gemina, and the 20th Valeria Victrix arrived from the Rhine frontier, while the 9th Hispania came from Pannonia. It is particularly noteworthy that the 2nd Augusta Legion was commanded by none other than the future Emperor Vespasian. Claudius himself traveled to Britain to formally declare the military success achieved, as the true underlying motive for this invasion appears to have been the glorious, albeit short-term, political goal of demonstrating his own military capabilities. He served as the nominal commander-in-chief of the forces at Camulodunum, modern Colchester. Satisfied with his victory, he triumphantly returned to Rome, where a triumphal arch was erected in honor of the event. After the emperor's departure, Claudius remained to manage the situation in Britain and decided to conduct a swift offensive. The Iceni tribe was offered friendly relations with Rome, with their autonomy preserved. The 9th Legion was dispatched to Lindum, now known as Lincoln. Vespasian and his 2nd Legion moved west, successfully capturing territories in Dorset and Wiltshire. However, 4 legions proved insufficient for the complete subjugation of the entire island, so Claudius decided to draw a clear border line across the island and erect a series of forts along it. Thus, the southeastern part of the island was securely established. Nevertheless, it would take almost another 50 years before the Romans could establish effective and stable rule over most of the British territory. Before the final establishment of firm Roman rule on the island, 2 major rebellions erupted. The first was led by Caratacus, chief of the Cativalani tribe, who inhabited south-central Britain. He offered persistent resistance to Roman forces for nearly a decade, employing guerrilla tactics, but failed to defeat the Romans in open battles. Eventually, he was captured and sent to Rome as a prisoner of war, where he was granted an audience with Claudius, who ultimately spared his life. The second significant rebellion was led by Boudica, the powerful queen of the Iceni tribe. She succeeded in burning Camulodunum, as well as Londinium, before being utterly defeated by Governor Suetonius's forces. Boudica chose to take her own life, thus avoiding Roman captivity. Surviving historical accounts are quite unfriendly, or at least ambivalent, towards Emperor Claudius, and a significant portion of this bias stems from his unusual reliance on freedmen. It should be noted that our primary sources originate mainly from the senatorial and equestrian orders, who traditionally governed the Roman state. These influential circles considered it a deep insult that former slaves, now freedmen, wielded such significant power and exerted such considerable influence over the emperor himself. However, Claudius, having spent most of his life away from the public arena and state affairs, did not possess a strong power base among the senatorial class, compelling him to rely on those he fully trusted. And, it should be noted, these freedmen rendered invaluable services to both the empire and the emperor personally. A completely different picture emerged concerning Claudius's last two wives. At the time of his ascension to the imperial throne, he was already married to Messalina, who had given him two heirs, Octavia and Britannicus. Nevertheless, throughout the 40s CE, relations between Claudius and Messalina steadily cooled. Messalina, for her part, had numerous extramarital affairs, and it was rumored she even visited brothels to compete with experienced courtesans, aiming to surpass them in the number of lovers. In 48 CE, while Claudius was outside Rome, Messalina orchestrated a mock marriage ceremony with one of her lovers, the prominent senator and consul Silius. Upon receiving this news, Claudius heeded the urgent advice of his loyal freedman Narcissus, who convinced him to immediately return to Rome and order their execution, which was carried out. It is highly probable that behind this extraordinary and scandalous act lay not only marital infidelity but a far larger conspiracy aimed at usurping Claudius's power. However, the precise details of this plot still elude researchers. At that historical moment, when the emperor realized the pressing need for a new spouse, he once again sought the wise counsel of his trusted freedmen, who wielded significant influence at court. It was then that Pallas, one of the most influential among them, put forward the candidacy of Agrippina the Younger, a woman of noble birth, who was Claudius's niece and one of the sisters of the infamous Caligula. Several historical accounts hint at an intimate relationship between Pallas and Agrippina, and that she, apparently, skillfully manipulated him with the sole purpose of gaining access to Emperor Claudius. Thus, Agrippina and Claudius officially formalized their marriage on New Year's Day, 49 CE. From her previous marriage, Agrippina already had a son, a boy named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who would later enter the annals of history as Nero. Notably, Nero was 4 years older than Claudius's own son, the young Britannicus. Throughout their marriage, Agrippina, with astonishing persistence and success, pressured Emperor Claudius to adopt her son and name him as his official successor, despite the fact that Claudius already had a legitimate heir from his previous wife, Messalina. As part of these intrigues, Nero was married to his stepsister, Octavia, which further solidified his position. Meanwhile, young Britannicus was systematically alienated from his father and kept away from the imperial court at Agrippina's direct instruction. The culmination of this power struggle occurred in late 54 CE. Agrippina, it appears, orchestrated Claudius's treacherous poisoning, leading to the emperor's sudden death. Britannicus was only 13 at the time, and being still a minor, he could not fully claim the throne, which paved the way for Nero's proclamation as the new emperor, much to the Senate's undisguised delight. After his death, Claudius was deified, thus becoming the second emperor in history after Augustus to be accorded such a high honor. Contemporaries might note that Claudius seemingly strived for the good of the empire, guided by what appeared to be the noblest intentions. However, despite these aspirations, he initiated a series of precedents that would later lead to the formation of a less stable and more susceptible empire. Firstly, one such precedent was securing the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard by paying them a monetary reward to solidify his claim to the imperial throne. Secondly, in his pursuit of greater efficiency in imperial administration, Claudius actively delegated authority to his loyal freedmen. Such a concentration of power in the hands of a small circle of individuals, and essentially in the hands of one person, the emperor, inevitably led to greater centralization of state governance. This, in turn, would seriously threaten the delicate balance of power between the Senate and the Princeps, which Augustus had so carefully established. Furthermore, Claudius took steps to integrate provincial inhabitants into the Senate. He altered the criteria for entry into this supreme legislative body, emphasizing cultural rather than ethnic affiliation with Roman civilization. Thus, he effectively granted the provinces significantly greater representation in state administration. Naturally, this innovation caused palpable discontent among ancient Roman senatorial families, who were now forced to enter into fierce competition with both provincials and influential freedmen for the preservation of their traditional power and privileges.